It was a rainy afternoon when I arrived at the Grandview Hotel. The kind of day where the sky seemed to bleed into the streets, casting a dull gray over everything. I just spent hours on the road, and all I wanted was a quiet place to rest my head. Walking into the lobby, I felt an immediate shift in atmosphere. The marble floors, the gold-trimmed chandeliers, and the over-the-top floral arrangements all screamed luxury. A place where I didn't quite feel I belonged. But I wasn't here for the grandeur. I was here for peace and quiet, something I could get in abundance. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly done hair and a tight smile, looked up as I approached the counter. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I assist you today?" I gave her a tired smile. "I have a reservation under the name James Parker." Her eyes scanned the computer screen, her fingers tapping at the keyboard. There was a slight pause before her eyes flicked up to meet mine, a look that felt dismissive, almost condescending. "Mr. Parker, right. A suite on the top floor, for a Mr. James Parker." She said it as though she was checking to see if the name was a joke. "I'm surprised a man like you could afford such a place." She handed me the key card without a smile. I was taken aback by the remark. But before I could respond, she turned her attention back to the monitor, as if I were no longer important. I grabbed the key, biting back a sharp remark. It wasn't worth it. I had bigger plans than to waste time on an exchange with someone so clearly unqualified to judge. I made my way up to the top floor, the elevator doors closing with a soft chime. The ride was smooth, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. I replayed the receptionist's words in my mind, trying to shake off the discomfort. "A man like you." What did she mean by that? As I stepped off the elevator and walked down the corridor toward my suite, I couldn't help but notice the luxury around me. This was not a hotel that welcomed just anyone. The decor was opulent, the carpets plush beneath my feet. Everything screamed exclusivity. It made me wonder how the receptionist had expected someone like me to fit in here. Arriving at my room, I inserted the key card, and the door clicked open. I entered the suite, which was just as magnificent as the rest of the hotel, gorgeous city views, a king-sized bed draped in silk, and an inviting sitting area by the window. The kind of room you'd expect a CEO or a wealthy businessman to stay in. I hadn't even considered the possibility that I could be mistaken for someone out of place. But clearly, the receptionist had already made up her mind about me. As I unpacked, a knock echoed at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but curiosity got the best of me. I opened the door to find the same receptionist standing there with a sheepish expression on her face. "Mr. Parker, I'm terribly sorry about earlier. I didn't mean to offend you," she said, her tone suddenly much warmer than before. "It's just that we don't often have guests like you." Her words trailed off, and I realized she was trying to salvage the situation, but it was too late. The damage was done. I stood there for a moment, looking at her awkwardly, feeling a strange mixture of disbelief and irritation. Her apology felt like an afterthought, a half-hearted attempt to smooth things over. But I wasn't interested in letting it slide. Not this time. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "You know," I began, my voice steady but cold, "it's interesting how assumptions work. How you can look at someone, make up your mind about them, and treat them accordingly." Her face flushed. She opened her mouth, likely to apologize again, but I held up a hand to stop her. "But here's the thing," I continued, "I'm actually the owner of this hotel." The words hit her like a slap. Her eyes widened, and for the first time since we'd met, I saw a real surprise, maybe even fear, in her expression. She didn't know how to respond. For a long moment, she just stood there, frozen, as the weight of the situation sunk in. "I'm sorry," she finally stammered. "I had no idea." I cut her off, stepping forward into the doorway, the faintest smirk playing at my lips. "It's all right," I said, my tone surprisingly calm. "But you might want to be careful about who you judge next time. You never know who you're dealing with." I turned to leave, but then paused, looking back over my shoulder. Oh, and by the way, I hope you're ready for a few changes around here. With that, I walked back into the suite and closed the door behind me, leaving her standing in the hallway, speechless. I barely had time to settle into the plush armchair by the window before I received a call on my phone. It was the front desk, and I already knew who was on the other end. I wasn't expecting an apology, though. At this point, I was just curious about what they would say next. "Mr. Parker, this is Emily from the front desk," she started, her voice shaky but still trying to sound professional. "I just wanted to let you know that we've taken immediate action regarding the situation earlier." I raised an eyebrow, leaning back in the chair. "Immediate action? What do you mean?" We've decided to relieve Sarah of her duties," Emily continued, her words coming out quickly, almost as if she were reading a script. "We understand that your experience here was compromised, and we're taking this very seriously. She will no longer be working here." I stared at the wall for a moment, processing her words. It felt almost surreal. The receptionist I'd encountered earlier, who had been so condescending, now out of a job because of one brief conversation. The power of perception. "That's a bit drastic, don't you think?" I said, my voice cool, but not entirely unsympathetic. I wasn't asking for anyone to lose their job. "Well, Mr. Parker," Emily hesitated. "We just felt that her behavior was inappropriate for a hotel of this caliber. We take our guests very seriously, and we can't allow that kind of attitude." There it was again, the justification for her actions. But as much as I had every right to be offended, part of me felt a bit guilty. No one should lose their job over a misunderstanding, no matter how poorly she had treated me. "Look," I said, rubbing the back of my neck, "I don't need anyone fired. Just make sure she gets a fair shot at a different position. Maybe one where she doesn't have to judge guests by the way they look." There was a long pause before Emily replied, her voice tinged with relief. "I'll make sure that happens, Mr. Parker. Thank you for your understanding." I hung up the phone, sinking into the chair once more. The events of the day had escalated in a way I hadn't anticipated. I'd come to the hotel for rest, not to play power games. But somehow, I'd ended up in the middle of one. The evening rolled in quietly, the city lights twinkling below as I gazed out the window. The stillness of the room felt soothing, but my mind was still buzzing. I had expected the situation with the receptionist to be over after my conversation with Emily, but as the night deepened, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite finished. Suddenly, there was a soft knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the knock was too tentative to be a hotel staff member on routine business. I hesitated for a moment before standing up and walking over to open it. To my surprise, there stood Sarah, the receptionist. She looked different now, her usual polished appearance replaced with something more disheveled. She was holding her hands in front of her as though unsure what to do with them. "Mr. Parker," she began, her voice much softer than before, I wanted to apologize for what happened earlier. I was out of line, and I've been thinking about it ever since. I was caught off guard. This wasn't the defiant, dismissive receptionist I had met earlier, this was someone genuinely trying to make amends. Her words hung in the air between us, and I could see that she was nervous, hesitant to even look me in the eye. "I know I made assumptions, and they were wrong," she continued. "I didn't realize who you were, and I was embarrassed by how I acted. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I wanted to at least tell you I'm sorry." For a moment, I just stood there, considering her words. It took a lot of courage to come back like this, especially after I had effectively set her up for failure with my revelation. "You know," I finally said, breaking the silence, "I appreciate you coming here to apologize. Most people wouldn't have. But you've got to understand something, being judged like that, for no reason other than how I look, it's not okay." "I get it now," she replied, her eyes finally meeting mine. I promise it won't happen again. I nodded slowly. Good. There was an awkward pause as neither of us seemed to know how to move forward. Finally, I spoke again. You've made your apology, and I respect that. But remember, just because you work at a place like this doesn't mean you should treat anyone differently based on appearances. Or anything else, for that matter. She nodded again, her face flushed. I'll keep that in mind. Well, Sarah, I said, I think we can leave it here. I won't make a bigger issue out of this. Her shoulders seemed to relax a little, as though she had been holding her breath the entire time. Thank you, Mr. Parker. Call me James, I replied, offering a small, genuine smile. With that, she turned and walked away down the hall, and I shut the door, reflecting on how quickly everything had changed. What had started as a minor inconvenience had turned into something far more complicated. But in the end, maybe it was for the best. Sometimes, the lesson comes in the form of uncomfortable situations, and it was clear that Sarah had learned something valuable today. The night passed quietly after Sarah's visit. My thoughts kept circling back to the events of the day, how a simple exchange had turned into such an unexpected chain of reactions. I had arrived at the hotel to escape from the world, to enjoy some peace, and instead, I'd found myself playing the role of an unwitting catalyst. The next morning, as I made my way down to the lobby for breakfast, the atmosphere felt different. There was a strange energy in the air, as though the hotel itself had shifted. The staff seemed unusually quiet, avoiding eye contact, and the usual bustling sounds of the hotel seemed muffled. I reached the front desk, and there was Emily, the same employee who had been on the phone with me the previous night. She glanced up, and for a second, I could see the hesitation in her eyes. It was clear that the events of yesterday were still weighing on everyone. Good morning, Mr. Parker, she said, offering a tight smile. I trust you had a restful night. I nodded. Yes, thank you. But I can't help but notice that things feel a little tense around here this morning. Is everything okay? Emily glanced over her shoulder, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Well, it's been a bit of a whirlwind since yesterday. There have been some conversations among the staff about the situation with Sarah. And honestly, some people are a bit on edge. On edge? I asked, raising an eyebrow. It's not like I asked for her to lose her job. I just wanted the situation addressed. I know, Emily said quickly. But, you know how it is. Word spreads fast. Some of the other employees are concerned. There's a lot of talk about what happened and what it means for them. Talk. I couldn't help but laugh softly. I don't think the people working here are in any position to talk about anything. But tell them to relax. I don't make a habit of causing problems. She looked visibly relieved at my response. I'll pass that along. As I turned to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that things had just become more complicated. The hotel had been running smoothly before all of this, but now, I had no idea what kind of ripple effect my actions had caused. There was no way to undo what had happened. As I sat down for breakfast, I couldn't help but wonder, had I done the right thing? Sure, I had addressed the situation, but did my actions create a bigger issue for the rest of the hotel? It was a tricky balance between standing up for what was right and creating unnecessary drama. It wasn't long before I found out just how much of a ripple my actions had caused. Later that afternoon, I received an email from the hotel's general manager, Mark Stevens. His tone was formal, but it was clear that the situation had escalated beyond my initial expectations. The email requested a meeting to discuss the events that had transpired and how they might affect the hotel's reputation moving forward. The words, reputation, and image stood out in bold, and I knew this was serious. I wasn't just dealing with a disgruntled receptionist anymore, I was dealing with a full-on management situation. I made my way to the manager's office, a large, corner room with panoramic views of the city. Mark was already seated behind a polished oak desk, his expression stern but not unfriendly. Mr. Parker, he said, standing as I entered, "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me." I nodded, taking a seat across from him. "Of course. What's this about, Mark?" He sighed and leaned back in his chair, looking uncomfortable. "I think you know why I asked you to come in. The situation with Sarah, it's not just about her. It's about how the entire hotel staff is reacting. And it's not just the staff. We've had some complaints from guests, too." "Complaints? About what?" I asked, genuinely confused. I couldn't fathom how this had affected the guests. My interaction with Sarah had been private, and it wasn't like I had caused any scenes. Mark pulled up a few reports on his computer and slid them across the desk to me. "Some guests have expressed concerns about the hotel's ability to properly vet its employees. There's a sense that the staff isn't adequately trained to handle high-profile guests like yourself." I frowned. "So now I'm the problem?" No, Mark quickly corrected. "Not at all. It's just that people are questioning the hotel's operations. And some employees have, well, they feel threatened. There's a fear that they might be next in line for scrutiny, and that's created some tension among the team." I rubbed my temples, the weight of the situation settling heavily on my shoulders. What started as a minor issue had blown up in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had never intended for Sarah to be a scapegoat, but I could see how my actions had set off a domino effect. "Look, Mark," I said, trying to remain calm, "I don't want anyone to lose their job over this. But we can't have a culture of judgment based on assumptions. I'm not here to cause chaos, I just wanted to address a problem that could have affected the hotel's reputation if it wasn't fixed." Mark nodded, acknowledging my point. "I understand. And we appreciate your perspective. But we need to find a way to smooth things over with the staff and the guests. I don't want this turning into a bigger issue." I sat there in silence for a moment, the tension in the room palpable. I knew I had to take responsibility for the aftermath of my actions, but I also couldn't ignore the fact that the situation had been mishandled from the start. "All right," I said, standing up. "I'll work with you to make sure things settle down. But this hotel can't afford to have an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. We need to be better than that." Mark stood as well, offering a handshake. "I agree. We'll figure this out, Mr. Parker. I'll keep you updated on any developments." As I walked out of his office, I couldn't help but wonder how much longer the fallout from that one interaction would continue. The hotel, which had once seemed like the perfect escape, now felt like a battlefield. And I was right in the middle of it. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, awkward encounters, and trying to smooth over the damage caused by my interaction with Sarah. I worked closely with Mark and the management team to ensure that the staff was properly trained on handling diverse guests, creating a more inclusive and professional environment. But despite all the efforts, I could tell that the hotel's atmosphere had changed. There was a sense of unease hanging in the air. The staff was walking on eggshells, unsure of how to act around me. I could feel the distance growing between myself and the people who worked here. What should have been a simple apology and lesson had turned into something much larger, something I hadn't bargained for. One afternoon, as I sat by the hotel bar, trying to unwind after yet another long day of discussing policies and procedures, I overheard a conversation between two staff members. They weren't trying to hide it, and their voices carried over the low hum of the hotel lobby. I heard Mr. Parker's not even really the owner, one of them whispered, casting a quick glance around. "Someone said he's just here as a guest, he's probably a relative of the actual owner or something." The other one nodded, leaning in. "That makes more sense. I mean, who'd believe that someone like him would own a place like this? It doesn't add up." I froze, my grip tightening on the drink in my hand. It wasn't the first time I'd heard rumors about me, people gossip, it's a fact of life. But this felt different. It wasn't just idle chatter anymore. It was a direct attack on my credibility. They weren't even convinced that I was who I claimed to be. I finished my drink and stood up, feeling a surge of anger bubbling beneath the surface. I wasn't going to let this go any further. I didn't care about the staff's discomfort, or their doubts. What bothered me was the complete lack of respect, not only for me but for the integrity of the hotel. The next morning, I called a staff-wide meeting. When the conference room filled with employees, the air was thick with uncertainty. They knew something was coming, but no one was quite sure what. I stepped up to the front, my expression serious. There's been a lot of talk recently. And I think it's time to clear the air. The room fell silent as I continued. I'm James Parker. And yes, I own this hotel. No, I'm not a relative of the actual owner. I'm the one who signed the checks. So if anyone has doubts about that, now's your chance to ask. I let the words sink in, watching as some of the staff exchanged uncomfortable glances. Now, let's move past this, because there's work to be done. We're here to run a world-class hotel, and that's exactly what we're going to do. No more gossip, no more rumors. If there are any questions about my position or anything else, I'm happy to answer them. But it stops here. The tension in the room was palpable. Some employees looked relieved, while others seemed ashamed. I could see that the gossip had been weighing on them more than I had realized. Let's focus on the job, I finished, taking a deep breath. This hotel deserves the best. And we need to be better than this. So if you're ready to put all of this behind us and get back to work, then we can do it together. One by one, the staff members started nodding, their shoulders relaxing as the weight of uncertainty began to lift. It wasn't going to fix everything overnight, but it was a start. I had no illusions that this would be the last challenge I faced here, but at least now, the foundation had been set. The days after the staff meeting felt different. The tension that had once gripped the hotel seemed to dissipate, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. The employees, though still a little uneasy, were slowly finding their rhythm again. For the first time since I'd arrived, the atmosphere in the hotel felt like it was getting back to normal. The whispers had died down, replaced by the sound of professionalism and hard work. Mark came to me later that week with good news. I've received positive feedback from both guests and staff. The changes are taking hold, he said with a smile. It's been a long road, but we're getting there. I nodded, still reflecting on the whirlwind of events. I had come to the hotel seeking nothing more than a place to relax, to get away from the noise of the world. Instead, I'd found myself in the middle of a personal and professional transformation. But perhaps that was the lesson all along. In life, things rarely go according to plan. You don't always get to choose your battles, but you do get to choose how you fight them. That evening, I was sitting by the window in my suite, looking out over the city. The rain had stopped, and the streets were starting to dry. The view was peaceful, exactly what I had been hoping for when I first checked into the Grandview Hotel. And yet, as I sat there, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The events of the past week had forced me to confront something I hadn't expected. They had shown me how easily people can judge based on appearances and how quickly things can spiral out of control when assumptions are made. But they had also reminded me that sometimes, standing up for what's right, no matter the cost, was worth it. Whether it was confronting a single moment of disrespect or addressing a larger issue of institutional behavior, the choice to do something about it was ultimately what mattered. I had survived the chaos. And in doing so, I had learned that sometimes, the greatest power isn't in revenge or anger, it's in the courage to address a problem head-on, with the strength to move forward. As I stood up from the chair and prepared to leave the hotel, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. The battle had been fought, and though the war wasn't over, I was ready for whatever came next. After all, that's what life was about, facing the unexpected, making decisions, and continuing to grow, no matter the challenge.